Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So welcome to another Friday Farm Report here on Locked On Mets with Jordan Grossman. Going to talk about a pitching prospect today that I think a lot of people are really excited about, JT Ginn, who is having or had an incredible season this year. What do we think about Ginn? What did he do this year, and what's his potential with the Mets coming up in the next couple of years here?
So this year was basically kind of a rehab year for Ginn. He just recovered from Tommy John surgery, which he had in 2020. Mets took him in the second round, gave him a $2.9 million signing bonus, which is basically first round money. But yeah, he had Tommy John surgery in March of 2020. So like Syndergaard, it took him a while to get back. He made his first start in June. They didn't really push him too far in terms of innings early on. He was maybe getting 3-4 inning starts in Port St. Lucie, but finished strong there. And let me just look at his season numbers right here. He actually, in 8 games with Low A St. Lucie, had a 2.56 ERA, 3.93 FIP, 0.93 WHIP. The strikeout numbers aren't really going to be big with him. Like, he only had 8.1 K per 9 in Port St. Lucie, and then a 7.6 in Brooklyn. So he's never going to be a big strikeout guy. But yeah, he had a really nice year. Started a little rough with Brooklyn. I think he had an ERA around close to 5 in his first 3 or 4 starts, but finished really strong. Had the numbers here, 1.57 ERA over his final 5 starts. Fastball is 92 to 95 with a good amount of sink. Slider is 84 to 86 with plus movement. That's his main strikeout pitch. And then the changeup is 80 to 82, and it's just starting to become a plus offering for him. So he's got 3 pretty good pitches. And he's a guy who should probably pencil into the AA rotation starting next season.
And how old is he? 21?
He's 22.
22 now? So yeah. You got a guy who obviously a college pitcher coming in, and someone that definitely profiles as a starting pitcher. We're not talking about someone who's going to end up in the bullpen. As you said, to be able to get a lot of ground balls, I think it is his eventual path to the big leagues, right? To be someone that can pitch to contact, mix up his pitches a bit. I don't want to say Marcus Stroman, but that type of a pitcher, right? Someone who can really rely on his movement and his using all those different pitches to get outs.
Yeah, Stroman's actually, it's a pretty good comp because like you said, it's all about the ground ball for him. He had a 58% ground ball rate in Port St. Lucie and then a 65% ground ball rate in Brooklyn, which is probably top of the league for both of them. So he's not a guy who's going to blow you away with like 97 or 98. He can do that if you move him to the bullpen, but he's not going to be a bullpen guy. Like in Mississippi State, where he went to school, he was doing 97, 98 early on when he was pitching out of the bullpen for them. But now that he's a full-time starter, he's, like I said, 92 to 95. But yeah, it's all about the ground ball with him, and having a good Mets defense behind him should probably help him. I see him as a mid-rotation guy. His floor is probably like a number 5. Similar to like a David Peterson. But yeah, I could see the Marcus Stroman comp being like, that's probably his ceiling.
And I think, obviously, when you have a player like Francisco Lindor, that's the cornerstone of your team, a lot of what you do is centered around him. And obviously, Ginn was picked before you had Lindor. But I would think that having a Lindor at shortstop almost makes him a more valuable prospect to this team over the next couple of years, because he should come into an infield that would be great behind him, that can really help him be at his best. I actually don't think that it's a coincidence that Marcus Stroman's struggles in the season, he really only had one rough stretch, and it was right around the All-Star break when Lindor was not part of that infield, and his best parts of this season have been when he had Lindor behind him.
Oh yeah, when you're talking about, Peterson, Stroman, Ginn, those ground ball guys, they need top-notch defenses behind them if they want to have, well, they're still good pitchers, obviously, but you want to have the best defense possible behind them every single night. I remember last year in 2019 when I was thinking about Stroman starts, I always wanted Luis Guillorme to play over JD Davis, just because you need that top-notch defense. But yeah, like you said, having Lindor in place, and having, hopefully a guy like Javi Baez in town for the next 5-6 years. You have Pete's, he's improved at first base too. You don't know what's going to happen at third. VR might be back, but he's shown he's a better defender than most people think. So, a really strong defense is going to help a guy like Ginn a lot.
And when you compare again to the guys we talked about last week in Aller and Gordon, what's the difference when you have a player like Glenn who was drafted really high as opposed to some of these guys who are a little bit older in these leagues who are making the most of their stuff now as opposed to someone who's a little bit younger at the start of their development?
Well, I mean, I guess there's more room for growth with him, and the Mets are going to prioritize his development over guys like Aller and Cole Gordon. Like, obviously the Mets are happy with those guys, what they're doing in AAA, AA, but Ginn was $2.9 million. That's a lot of money for a second round pick. So they want guys like him and Matt Allen to be at the top of their priority list to make sure they can have the best career possible. And he's someone who like I said, he'll probably be penciled into the AA rotation at the start of next year as a 22-year-old, which is still, below average age for that league. So it should be interesting to see how he does over there. But having a pitching lab in Port St. Lucie is going to be big for Ginn at the start in the start of the spring when everyone's down there for camp. Should probably get a big league invite at the start of camp. His priority, his development is going to be a big priority for the Mets.
And we've seen it. If you can start the season in a AA rotation, it's not a guarantee, of course, that you're going to make the big leagues, but that's a possibility if you have a great year and if the path opens for you. I mean, really, a lot of times with pitchers, it comes down to injuries and when they need a starter, if you are pitching to a point where they decide to call on you. So I think it's going to be really interesting next year, someone that we'll be watching for sure. And if not next year, I would imagine that by 2023, you're going to see him in the Mets rotation in some capacity. Let's talk about a hitter now to close out the Friday Farm Report. We got Alex Ramirez today. What do you like about this prospect?
So Ramirez is a guy who's really all potential right now. I mean, if I read you his stats just off the top, it's not really going to be that impressive. He had 325 plate appearances in Port St. Lucie this year, slashed a 255, 323 on base, and a 378 slugging. 93 weighted runs created plus, which is a little below league average. Struck out 31.4% of the time, had 18 extra base hits, and only a 6.8 walk percentage, which, like I just said, the numbers on their face value aren't great. But this is a kid who's 18 years old. The Mets gave him around $2 million in 2019 as one of their big bonus guys out of international free agency. But yeah, he's someone he was probably going to be a Dominican Summer League rookie ball guy last year, but because of COVID, things got shut down. So we had to go straight to low A with no real development whatsoever. So just seeing the kind of things he was doing, like he's a big speed and power guy right now. He doesn't show the power too much in game, but when I've heard when you watch him take BP, it's really impressive. It's like Vientos, maybe not Alvarez level, but like really impressive exit velos that he can post. The swing can get long at time, which is why, the 30+% K percentage. But a big speed and power guy right now. And someone the Mets are just dreaming on when he's 6'3", only 170 pounds. So they're hoping he can fill out a little bit more. And when he eventually does that, they think they have a guy who can maybe turn into a 5-tool star.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, this is his first year, obviously. So if you have to understand that there's a lot that goes into playing your first professional season, not only on the field, but off the field when you're one of these guys who's coming from one of those Latin American countries, a lot that you have to adjust to. So I think that with the prospect like that, who's that raw, you don't worry as much about the numbers. You look at what you see with the tools, and hopefully by next year you start to get some production. Would you imagine next year he's going to once again be starting off in low A?
So it's a possibility. I mean, he's got, like I said, over 300 plate appearances in Port St. Lucie. So I think it's really going to depend on how his spring camp goes next year. I think if he's, what they did with Mark Vientos last year is they put him against a lot of AA pitching. And I think he was originally supposed to start in Brooklyn, but they saw that he was handling the high A pitching the AA pitching pretty well. So they decided to move him up there. The same thing could happen with Ramirez if he starts facing guys in high A and they see that he's, really holding his own. He's someone who could probably start in Brooklyn next year, but there's definitely a chance that they put him back in Port St. Lucie just for the first few weeks to see if he's really, grown and can cut down on the strikeouts a little bit.
It's going to be another interesting player to watch. I feel like a good thing about doing this each week is we're spotlighting not just the top guys, but even guys that maybe aren't getting talked about as much in the lower levels. And there's a lot of talent in this organization right now. So I think that the Mets farm system has some of their better days ahead of them if it's managed correctly. I think that's obviously the big thing heading to this offseason, who's going to be managing it. One last question I want to ask you, not necessarily about the farm system, but about someone who graduated this year, which is Tylor Megill. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about the big innings jump. He's about 50 innings more than he pitched in 2019, had a year off in between, with the Mets basically out of this playoff race at this point. I mean, there's a fringe chance, but if we're realistic, is there really any point to push him? He just had a bad start. So here was the thing I was contemplating with on yesterday's show. Is it worth it to give him one more start to try to end his season on a good note? Or do you just shut him down and say, look, you had a great year. Let's focus on getting you ready for next season?
I mean, I definitely see the benefit in giving him one more start just for that confidence boost. Like you said, you don't really want to end the year where you give up like 6-7 earned runs in a start. That's just really like you go into the offseason feeling pretty bad about yourself. But 50 innings over his previous high is just, it's not what you want to do to a rookie. I think shutting him down is the best option right now. Bringing someone like a Yamamoto or someone like we talked about last week, like an Adam Aller, can come up and pitch some innings for the Mets. I like to say that they're still in the race, but I really don't think so. I think there's just too many teams they have to jump this late in the season, when there's only two and a half weeks left. So I think, bringing in some guys from AAA and just having Megill shut down is probably the best outlook for the Mets right now.
And I think that could be what we see, but you never know with the Mets. So we'll see what happens next week. As always, thank you for joining me for our Friday Farm Report. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find your work?
So you can find me at MetsFansandSo2 on Twitter. You can also find me working at the Locked On Mets social media account on Twitter. And last but not least, you can find my We Are Mets Believers page on Facebook.